What's up, guys? Toad back again with yet another day. Another day, continue the grind. Yesterday, a slight loss, but it looked like it was going to be a totally lost day, starting out 0-2 with those college football plays where both of them landed within one score of the number and they just did not get there. Iowa, Nebraska, that game was as ugly as you would expect it to be, and it came down to a turnover at the wrong time. Nebraska lost the turnover battle, still could have done it, and I think an interception, like really late after Iowa had thrown an interception, Nebraska threw it right back to them, handed them the ball in field goal range, basically, and that was it. Iowa wins by a field goal. Game could have gone either way. Yeah, I mean, should have expected that to kind of be the case, I guess, it to be that type of game. But I thought that the motivational components of that handicap were quite strong, so I liked it. It could have gotten there, even though Nebraska lost the turnover battle. The fact that they still could have won that game pretty much right at the end there. It was tied right near the end there. That tells you that there was something to that play, at least I think. And then Central Michigan was looking decent. They were holding Toledo's offense down. It looked like, I don't know, from what I could see, it looked like Toledo was doing what you would think. They were just trying to get in and get out. Like, they're already in the MAC title game, so you want to get in and not have your players get injured, anything like that. And that game was within the number for quite a while. Toledo's score total was not high. Like, I think it was 10-0 at halftime, but it was like Central Michigan's not holding up their end of the bargain here. But they were within the number repeatedly in the second half, and they wound up falling on the wrong side of that too with Toledo. I don't know if it was a defensive score. I don't know what it was, but Toledo scored another touchdown towards the end there to get themselves back on their side of the spread there. So that one fell the wrong way as well. And then the night games, we hit two underdog money line plays there. Two underdogs winning outright. One in the NHL with the Calgary Flames. That was a close game. Statistically, it was close. So I think getting like a pretty big underdog price when the game is that close seems to be that you got value on that. It was the right side, whether they fell on the right side of it or not. Like, they were in that game until the end. But of course, as we know, Calgary, they were down, I think, at most one score in the game. And then in the third period, they really turned it on and scored 4 goals, just a barrage of goals in the third period, and wound up winning 7-4 and making it look less close than the game actually was, because it was certainly close. And then the Sacramento Kings was the easy winner for me there. I know some of you guys were giving me crap for that one. I don't weigh these like in-season tournament shit. Like, I don't really weigh that heavily. Like, I just treat it like it's a regular season game, really. Like, I don't see much reason not to. Like, there's so much of this thing that's the in-season tournament. It's like, who cares, really? I just look at what the scheduling situation is and how it sets up, regardless of whether it's considered to be one of those games or not. I'm like, it's still a home game for Minnesota. Like, I'll just treat it as such, basically. And Sacramento, I felt they were in the better spot, and that is what happened. They won outright fairly easily. So that was good. So that brought me back to just a slight loss on the day. So I'll take it after a horrific college football start. And college football, I was down on college football. It was my only losing sport last year. And this year it was looking like it was also my only losing sport. But last week, the 4-0 and running really well a couple weeks in a row in college football put me back on the positive for that entire span. So I think I am still positive this year, but negative in the 2-year span, because last year was pretty negative. But because of the 0-2 yesterday, now I'm back on the red side of that. So I'm back on the losing side in the last 2 seasons combined. But I think I'm still on the winning side in this particular season. But college football has not been great to me, even though I mean, I think I'm just getting unlucky in a lot of cases as well. But it hasn't been my best. Let's move to today. So speaking of college football, I do have my college football video up. There are 2 more plays. And I mentioned I have some opinions on some of the other games. I talked about a bunch of it in my college football video. I don't know if there's anything else that I didn't talk about, any of these other games. I think I covered pretty much everything I wanted to there. But that video's up. I got the 2 plays that are out there. The lines haven't really moved since I made that video. The 2 plays that I have today, but the Jacksonville State one, the 2.5 looks like it's with juice. I don't know if you can find the 2.5 at -110 anymore anywhere. So you can decide what you want to do with all that information. I like the side for sure on Jacksonville State, and it's basically just get the best number that you can. Kind of might be a way to look. A way to look there might be to look for a money line play on that one that is not that expensive a price. Moving to today, yeah, there's another big college basketball slate. I mean, it's Saturday. You got these early season tournaments going on and a bunch of stuff. I looked at the card. I kind of tried to see if anything was going to like catch my eye, but I just don't see anything. I don't even think I want to opine on any of these games really, although I don't know, like the Emerald Coast tournament that's going on in Florida there has some interesting matchups kind of to me with Alabama, Oregon. You got Alabama being a ranked team and they're up from 7.5 to 8.5. It's like, I don't know, what can you glean from that? It's one of those situations where it's a ranked versus an unranked, and maybe people will weigh the ranking too heavily there and think that Alabama is, and especially because Alabama was so good last year and people remember that, but that seemed like an outlier season to me for Alabama, even though they certainly are good, but I don't think they're like one of the top teams in college basketball. So, I mean, take from that what you will. I guess there's probably not going to be value to be had on Alabama because of those things. And then Ohio State is or not at Santa Clara, but playing Santa Clara in that tournament in Florida. Ohio State's up from 6 to 7.5, which both of those teams are coming off pretty big games, I think, in that same tournament. I think Ohio State just played Alabama. And did they win? I don't even know. They might have. Let me see real quick. Because that would be, I would tend to think that Ohio State might be in a little bit of a letdown. Yeah, they beat Alabama by 11. So it's possible they might be in a bit of a letdown after that. But I don't know. I don't even know how these tournaments like work, though. Like, oh, if Ohio State needs to win, it's like a round robin thing. They need to win this game too to be considered the winner of this tournament. Eventually, they need to keep winning. I don't know, but I don't know if maybe after that big win over Alabama, you might be a little bit high on yourselves after that, and you might take it a little bit easier against Santa Clara. But then again, Santa Clara is kind of an under the radar WCC team because everybody knows about Gonzaga. They know about St. Mary's in that conference there, but Santa Clara's been playing pretty well. They've been one of the top 3 or 4 teams in that conference the last couple of years, and they're undefeated to start this season, but they haven't really faced anybody that good. But they did beat Stanford, and then in this tournament, they beat Oregon, which is a decent win, really, against a bigger conference team, Pac-12 team that isn't that bad. So they're coming off a big win as well. So I don't know which direction I would want to look at that, but just some thoughts on those games in that tournament, which is kind of the most interesting thing that you can find in college basketball there. I do have 2 plays. One is going to be, I have 2 in the college football slate. They're in my college football video. 2 plays I'm adding to the card here today, one in NHL, one in the NBA. Mention maybe a couple of opinions here as well in the NHL. I do lean to the Boston Bruins a little bit, but I don't think I can play it because I think it's just a game where both teams probably are going to be motivated. They both played yesterday, but the Bruins are at the New York Rangers. They've gone up from -104 to -114 as a road favorite, which people, if they look at these teams' records and they're both good, and the Rangers actually have one fewer overall loss than the Bruins do, people might say, how's Boston like favored on the road when this looks like kind of an even matchup? But then again, people might also say, well, Boston was like a historically good team last year, and they have a lot of those players still on the team this year, so they are still a really good team. So I don't know what like the public's sentiments might be on this, but I do see 51% of the tickets, but 68% of the cash on the Rangers now, even though when I looked a little while ago, the cash discrepancy was on the Bruins, and the line is moving up on the Bruins. So I don't know which way to read this, but the Rangers are coming back from a road trip, so that's kind of the biggest negative that I see with the Rangers. But in that road trip, it was kind of weird because they mostly stayed close to home, but they had this one weird outlier game in the middle of it where they went to Dallas. And then other than that, they were in like New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So I don't know. So they're not really traveling that much, but they are returning from a 4-game road trip where they went 3 of 4. But it's not like when you come home, you might not have the typical distraction spot when it's the Bruins coming into your house that you would if it was some lesser opponent, which, by the way, is going to factor into my actual play that I have here. So just a slight lean to the Bruins, though, because the Rangers also had a good game yesterday and won pretty easily over the Flyers. And the Bruins, of course, had their worst game of the year, and they can't beat the Detroit Red Wings, man. I don't know what's up with that, but the Bruins had a bad loss to the Red Wings. Definitely their worst loss of the year, even though the Red Wings aren't a bad team. But I think the Bruins could be in a bounce-back kind of angry mood after that, and might be getting even a little bit of value just based on seeing yesterday's results. So that's kind of the way I look at that. And I believe the Rangers also have Quick in net, but he's a veteran. He's been really good, even though Shesterkin is the number one goalie on their depth chart there. They have a good goaltending tandem in New York there in the Rangers, although the Bruins also do. I think it's probably going to be Ullmark today for the Bruins. They're number one goalie on the depth chart, but Swayman has not been bad either. So I don't know. Both teams have a good goaltender tandem there, but those are my thoughts on that one. Just noticed it. And then Calgary at Colorado is just kind of weird because both teams played tough games yesterday. Colorado's down from minus 165 to minus 163 as the money line favorite. 84% of the tickets, but 97% of the cash on the Avs. My tendency would be to lean kind of against Calgary just because the win they had last night for me was so crazy. And this is going to be their fourth straight road game. But both of these teams are on back-to-backs, and they're both kind of coming off big games that kind of went to the wire. So Calgary had that big win, upset win at Dallas. And coming off that, it's like, will they run out of like steam? But I don't know. Maybe they'll show up focused still because the Avalanche are a big team. The Avalanche yesterday were coming off a big win over the Canucks, which was in a return home spot, but only from a short road trip. Then they went back out on the road for a single road game at Minnesota last night. And that was a close game. And Colorado was able to get out of there with a win. Now they're coming back home again, back into elevation. So their schedule has some weird components to it too. So I just stay away from it. But I think it's one of the more interesting games on the slate today. And then the game that I actually will have a play on, which I'll mention, I don't usually do this. I don't usually take underdogs that are kind of in this range, but this is going to wind up being a puck line play, even though I'm laying a little bit of extra juice to take the puck line here. If it's close enough to like minus 110, minus 120 range or so, I will tend to do that, tend to go that way, even though you have to pay a little bit extra. But you might know where I'm going now just because I just said all that. But I'm going to fade the Vegas Knights, man. This is I faded Dallas off of the Dallas-Vegas game, and now I'm fading the other end of that as well with the Vegas Knights. So they haven't played since that game either. Vegas, I'll talk about the market first, I guess. Vegas is up from minus 213 to minus 230 on the money line, so maybe it's possible you can get a puck line even closer to the minus 110 range if you wait a little bit more. I don't know, but Vegas they got 96% of the cash, but 84% of the tickets, and it looks like the line is going up on them. I don't know if I buy any of that, but they're certainly going to be the public team. I mean, they're a team with a really good record. They're last year's champions. They've been playing really well. And last we saw them, like I was just saying, they beat Dallas in overtime, which was a big win over one of the other top teams in the Western Conference. Now they're returning home from a 5-game road trip. And yeah, they've had 2 days off, but they finished that road trip, and the road trip wasn't particularly good for them. They went 2-3 on the road trip, or I guess 2-1, because one of the losses was in overtime at Philadelphia. But the road trip took them fairly far, took them to the East Coast and up into Canada, into Montreal. And they started playing a little bit worse hockey than they did when they started out the season. They'd beaten Dallas earlier in the season as well, though, and they were able to beat them again in both close games. Both went into overtime. The first one went into a shootout. This one went into overtime. So that's how they finished the road trip there. They did have 2 days off, but that included Thanksgiving. So I think this is still going to be a return home distraction type of spot because of that. Even though you have that extra day off, you were doing family things, you were having Thanksgiving, you have all the distractions that come with that. I think it is a distracted spot with the return home spot from road trip. And because the last game you played, you had a huge win over Dallas. Now you got Arizona coming into your house, and that extra break might like disrupt any momentum that maybe you got from that last win too. And now this is just a single home game. You have to go right out on the road again and play Calgary in 2 days, and then Edmonton and Vancouver. So you're going to Canada to face more divisional opponents, whereas Arizona's not in your division. So even though Arizona and Calgary have similar records, or I think they're slightly below 500, I don't know. Are they going to have a little bit more focus on Calgary just because it's a divisional opponent? I'm not sure about that, but I think it's just a return home distraction spot and a letdown spot for the Vegas Knights here. So that's why I'm fading them. I think it's possible they overlook the Arizona Coyotes here. And Arizona, I think they're in a much better spot, to bounce back. Because Arizona was playing fairly well, but since then they've lost 3 games in a row, but they're all to good teams. They lost at Winnipeg in a final game of a 4-game road trip. That was a tough road trip, but they had faced some pretty good opponents. They came back home, and in that return home spot, they did not do well, and they lost to the LA Kings, who are a pretty good team. They stayed at home, and they did not have the return to form, like bounce back that you might see after you have an ugly game in the first game. They played better, but they still lost 6-5, which not typical to what you see from Ingram, who is the better of the 2 goaltenders, I would say, on Arizona, at least record-wise, even though Ingram and Vejmelka have kind of similar stats, but it was like there was a stretch up until that 3-game loss streak where Arizona was winning every game with Ingram in net and losing everyone with Vejmelka in net. So I mentioned that in a couple of my other videos. It was kind of weird the way that was happening, where they just kept winning with one guy in net and losing with the other guy. But then they had this stretch where they actually lost 2 games in a row with Ingram in net, and that 6-5 one was really probably his worst performance. Lost to the Blues there, but the Blues still aren't a bad team. But now since then, they've had 2 days off, and yeah, it's true that they also had Thanksgiving during that 2-day rest. They did, but now they get to go out on the road for a single game here in Vegas. But I think you're going to be focused. So you were losing at home. You did your Thanksgiving thing. Now you're going to go out on the road, and you're leaving all that stuff behind. That losing that you were doing at home, that loss streak, you get to break that losing momentum, go on the road. I think that's good. You had your Thanksgiving. You get to kind of recover from those losses, put those out of mind. Now you go on the road, and you're facing the returning champions, man, the Vegas Knights. And I think they haven't faced them yet this year either. So that's a big game. It's a spot where you're in a bounce back spot. You get to focus on hockey. I believe Ingram is going to be in net again because they've had that break. So I do like that better, even though they lost the last 2 games with him in net. If he is in net again here because of the break that they've had, I think that's a positive for Arizona, especially also when you're a goalie and you have a bad game like that. I think it's better to go back out there and regain your confidence rather than be sat for the other goalie, because that could like hurt your confidence a bit more. I think you want to go back out there and play a better game. So all of that in mind, I think it's a bad spot for Vegas. Like I said, they're returning home from a road trip, and they are coming off a big win. Arizona is trying to break a 3-game loss streak and getting to go back out on the road. And it's a spot where they're in a bounce back spot and a spot where I think they'll regain some focus. So that's what I like about it. I'm taking Arizona. I took them on the puck line at what did I do? -125, I think, on the puck line. So you're laying a little bit of extra juice there to take the spread there, the puck line. But that's the way I like when it's close enough to like the -120 sort of range. I think it's worth it to get that extra goal and then put a little bit of the bet on the money line still, which is I got +196 on that, but I make it into kind of a spread bet with like a money line sprinkle, but pay a little bit more to do it. But that's the way I'm doing it. Arizona +1.5 on the puck line at -125. And let's go to NBA because I do have one play there too. Quickly in the NBA, I do lean to the Brooklyn Nets, so I'll point out that game. But it looks like a lot of the value is kind of gone on that game because the line has gone up from -1 to -4, with the Nets as a 4-point favorite at home now with 99% of the cash on Brooklyn and 55% of the tickets. So it looks like there's a cash discrepancy on Brooklyn, and the line is really moving up on Brooklyn. And people are going to look at that line and think it looks really suspicious. Like, how are the Nets favored by more than home court at home against the Heat? That looks crazy. I don't think the Nets are actually the better team than Miami, but I do think that this is a spot where it is a really bad spot for the Heat and a much better spot for the Nets. So even though I think the line has gone a little bit too far and I can't quite get there with the play on the Nets are the way I would lean. in this one, and it looks like, of course, the market is in pretty heavy agreement with me, like driving the line up that much on the Nets. I don't know if there's another injury. I mentioned with the Heat yesterday that Adebayo had been injured, but he played yesterday, so I don't know what the injury situation is. I would expect that he's going to play if he played yesterday, unless he like re-injured himself. I don't know, but Miami played yesterday, so that's one factor here. I think Miami is in a bad spot, which is why this line has moved as much as it has. Miami played yesterday. Brooklyn did not. Miami lost at New York, which I mentioned I leaned to the Knicks, but the line had kind of gotten a little bit out of control on that. The Knicks did not cover. They won by 2, or they wound up being favored by like 5 or 5.5. But that was a big game for Miami nonetheless, and kind of a tough loss. It went down to the wire, basically. Miami lost by 2. That was a game against the Knicks. That was the Knicks, as I mentioned, were also playing for revenge for being knocked out of the playoffs last year, because Miami knocked the Knicks out of the playoffs last year. Now Miami has to go to Brooklyn, so they're not traveling much, obviously. They're staying in New York City. But after this, who do they have up next? Miami has to play the Milwaukee Bucks, which is, I don't know when that is. That's Tuesday. So they have a couple of days off, but they come home and they play the Milwaukee Bucks, who are another team that they eliminated from the playoffs last year. So they have this sandwiched in between 2 bigger games. I do think it's kind of a sandwich spot, because you're playing 2 teams that you faced in the playoffs last year, even though you eliminated both of them. Those teams are going to be gunning for you, so you might be focused as well on those 2 teams. Even though they might have a little bit more motivation. I don't know if Milwaukee already played Miami this year. They may have already played them and gotten their revenge this year. I don't remember. I think they did. But even so, it's a big look-ahead spot as well. So I think it's a sandwich spot for Miami. I don't know how much attention they're going to be paying to Brooklyn, and it's a back-to-back, so their rest spot isn't as good. And Brooklyn has fallen to below 500 with 3 losses in a row, one of them to Miami on the road at Miami. So they might have that in mind a little bit too. And they've had 2 days off, and in their last game, they lost a really high scoring overtime game to Atlanta, which both teams played it into the 140s, which is crazy. So they've had extra days off. So Brooklyn, that is factoring into the line for sure. The fact that Brooklyn has that better rest spot, and because it's factored into the line to such a degree, I just have to stay away from it, even though, like I said, I think the spot is really bad for the Heat. So I think it is a much better spot for Brooklyn. I would not want to be on the side of the Heat there. Though a lean would be to the Nets. I just think the line is a little bit too out of control now to do it. And what else do we got here? I thought I had one other lean. I think I lean to the Cleveland Cavs slightly here. They've gone up from a 2.5 to a 3.5 point favorite at home against the LA Lakers. They're in a bounce back spot, I would have to say. I don't see any of the market percentages on this one yet, but the Cavs, in their previous game, they lost really badly to the Heat. And I don't know if the Cavs they might have had some injury situation in that game too. I'm not even sure what they had going on there, but they had just come off a huge overtime win at Philadelphia. They came back home with no time off, and they were playing a 3rd game in 4 days, 4th game in 6 days, although all of them besides the Philadelphia game were at home, so they weren't really having to travel that far. But back-to-back, they came home. Miami just blew the doors off of them and beat them by 33 points, which is a really ugly loss. I don't care if it's to a good team like Miami. When you lose by 30-something, you're going to want to bounce back. You're staying at home. You had like the holiday break there. A little bit there, 2 days off, and now you get LA coming into your house. I think it's a better spot for Cleveland to bounce back and play better there. They got the adjustments to make, so that's what I like about that. And the LA Lakers, I believe they're in a bad spot, but I would have to refresh my memory on that. Yeah, so LA, in their last game, they played a tight game against Dallas, who's been one of the better teams in the Western Conference so far this year. That was a tough game. They lost, but LA, it was a close game, so they might be in a little bit of a hangover spot. And they have Philadelphia up next. And it's like, will they have one eye looking ahead to Philadelphia, because Philadelphia has a much better record than Cleveland does. Cleveland's still a pretty good team, so I don't know. You might still have some focus on Cleveland just because people know they're still pretty good. They were a playoff team last year. And the Lakers do have a couple days off as well, and they get to go out on the road, and they get to break away from that like loss that they had in their last home game there. So there are a few positives for the Lakers that keep me off it a little bit, but I think it's more of a negative for the Lakers than it is for Cleveland. I think it's kind of only positives for Cleveland there. So that's the way I look at that one. The play I'm actually going to make is a play where the market read looks really good to me on this one. It looks like it's a pros versus Joes situation. It looks like there's reverse line movement on this one. It's a game where the line looks a little bit suspicious, and I think, and people aren't really going to want to touch the team that I'm going to be on here, and it's going to be on the Utah Jazz. And the market looks like it's flipped the favorite here from the Jazz, a 1.5 point home underdog to a 1 point favorite. Now, I was able to get them as a 1 point underdog. So I think the underdog price might still be out there, but there's not much of a difference when it's really just in the pick the winner mode. Whichever team's favored by 1 or 1.5, even really, it doesn't matter that much, I don't think. The Jazz have 83% of the cash on them, but 59% of the tickets on the Pelicans. And it makes sense that the public would be only on the side of the Pelicans here because, well, what have the Pelicans been doing? Like, I think they're a team that was in one of those play-in games in the playoffs last year, whereas Utah did not make the playoffs at all. Pelicans have an above 500 record. The Jazz have a terrible record, so why would anybody want anything to do with the Jazz? And the Pelicans have looked really good recently. They are on a 3-game win streak. Prior to the wins, well, they've been playing really well for a while now. They had a stretch where they beat Dallas after they lost to Dallas the previous game. So it was a zigzag kind of type of spot there, but they crushed Dallas by 21. Then after that, they beat Denver by 5. Huge win against the returning champs. Played Minnesota to within 1 at home right after that. The day after that, still at home. They were at home for like all these games. Big game there too. Then they swept the back-to-back, both games at home against Sacramento. They swept them in both games, crushed them in the first game, and then played a closer game where I thought it was a zigzag where Sacramento would show up and win that second game, but that was not the case. Pelicans won it again, and they were doing all of that without McCollum, too, because he's been out for a while now with a lung puncture, and he's probably their best player. He's been out, but they've had guys. Zion has been stepping up. Ingram has been stepping up. They've been playing pretty well. They do have some other really good players on this team. So, and then what did they do yesterday? They went to LA to start this road trip, and they beat the LA Clippers as well. And the Clippers are still kind of figuring out what they're doing there with James Harden there, but they're still a really good team with a bunch of really good players on it, a stacked team. So that's a pretty big win for New Orleans there over the LA Clippers to start the road trip. So now they're on a 3-game win streak. They've won 5 of the last 6, and it's been all against good teams too. So people are going to look and think, well, New Orleans, like they're at a point where they're now like at an underdog price here. Like, how could you not think that there's value on the Pelicans here? They've been beating all these good teams. They have the much better record than the Jazz. Like, what's going on with this line here? I think it's a bad spot. I think this is a spot where they're in a bad rest spot, and I think maybe they're going to finally run out of steam a little bit because they're playing a back-to-back in different cities, going into elevation from the West Coast, they're playing in all these different time zones here. So this is going to be a 3rd game in 4 days in 3 different time zones, I believe, as well, and in 3 different cities, of course, and it's a 4th game in the last 6 days as well. Even though the first 2 of those are at home, and it's actually a 5th in 8 and a 6th game in 9 days as well. But the first 3 of those or the first 4 of those are all at home. But recently, this travel spot is just not good. They're kind of bouncing all around and having a really jam-packed schedule here. You come off all these big wins. You just beat LA, James Harden, Paul George, all those guys that are in LA. I don't think they have any injuries, but I think they're all playing over there. And Russell Westbrook, a star-studded LA team. Now you have to go into the mountains and play a Utah team that's been really struggling. You have to play them twice, actually, before you come back home and face Philly, who is a much better team. Are you going to be totally focused on Utah with no days off like this, having to travel? I don't think so. Excuse me. I think it's a bad spot for the Pelicans. I think this might be the spot where they kind of get caught. They're in a bad scheduling spot here, bad rest spot. And the line hasn't really moved that much to reflect it. So I like all that about it. The market looks like it's in total agreement with me here. Really bad spot for the Pelicans for all the reasons I just mentioned. Letdown spot, bad rest spot. And then what do we have on the other side here for the Utah Jazz? I think they're in a bounce back spot, even though, yes, they're returning home, but they're returning home from only a 2-game road trip that went out to the West Coast, and they've had 2 days off, although, yes, they had Thanksgiving in the middle of that. But I think that extra day's rest is a much better spot than having to be on a back-to-back and traveling between different time zones like the Pelicans are doing right now. Utah has had those 2 days off, so I think that might help disrupt that losing momentum that they had where they lost 4 straight games, but the first 2 of those were close against Phoenix, where one of them went into double OT. Then they went out and they lost to the Lakers. Not really shame in losing to the Lakers, but they did get blown out, so that's not good, really. Then they went up to Portland, and they played really poorly against Portland, but I think that's kind of like the final straw, maybe I would say. Like, the stock can't get any lower in Utah. Now they've lost all those games in a row, but the last one of those is a really ugly double-digit loss to a bad Portland Trailblazers team. But it was the team they'd just beaten by a lot in at home not that long before that. So maybe Portland had a little bit of revenge in mind. I don't know. That was a back-to-back and a third game in 4 nights in different cities for Utah, so it wasn't the best spot for them. But now I think you're getting value on Utah because of that stretch of losses that just makes them look awful. Pelicans are on that stretch of wins that makes them look awesome. And now Utah's the team that has the rest, even though, yeah, they had Thanksgiving yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever the case is, 2 days ago. I think they're going to use that break to kind of resettle themselves, refocus as well. You got to play a game. You got a team with a winning record coming into your house. You need a win. You're at below 500. You're playing for some respect here, some pride. I think Utah's going to show up here. The line and the market all seems to really agree with me on this. I think it reflects it. I'm taking the Utah Jazz +1, and that's going to do it, man. Those are the plays for today. So it's going to be I got my 2 college football videos. Go watch that video there. Those are still the numbers are still basically sort of there, except I mentioned Jacksonville State. A little bit of lost value there, maybe because the juice is a little bit higher than I would like. But other than that, I like those 2 plays in college football, and the 2 plays I just added here in this video. The NHL, Arizona Coyotes +1.5 on the puck line at -125 is what I played, with a bit of a sprinkle on the money line there. And the Utah Jazz +1 in the NBA. That's going to do it, man. Have a good college football Saturday, the last full college football Saturday of the week, of the season. Peace out, man.